and just so excited to have everyone here today to explore what I think is a very important, critical, and inspiring topic for us to explore. So I'm Jeremy Lent, and just want to welcome you formally to this month's Deep Transformation Live Network meeting. And so really, I think anyone who's joined the Deep Transformation Network is aware of so many things going on in the world today. So I don't think anyone joining this conversation today really needs to be told we're in the middle of this unfolding catastrophe, right, of climate breakdown. And I know that many of you are playing your own part in trying to do something about it. But one of the biggest questions is how can this urgent need for action on climate breakdown become a central topic of mainstream thinking and action? As we all know, to our exasperation, mostly it's ignored by mainstream media. Oftentimes they'll do this, there'll be some climate catastrophe and they'll do these great news shots about the hurricanes and the floods and the drought and everything, but it's rare they even go deeper, even for a moment, to look at the underlying serious issues. And oftentimes the actions taken to raise awareness about the crisis get pigeonholed right into climate activism, which is then seen by most people, oh, that's something that other people are doing. It's not me. It's not what I'm around. And that's the dilemma that the Climate Majority Project is aiming to solve. And their two founders who are here today, Rupert and Liam Kavanagh, basically realized that most people are concerned about climate change, but they just don't know what to do about it. But meanwhile, governments will only be motivated to make the changes needed when their electorate's actually demanding it. So their aim is to help the majority of people who care about climate change to understand they're powerful together and take meaningful action that are relevant to themselves and their communities too. So they're beginning in the UK, but their goal is to extend their approach globally. And hopefully here in the DTN, we can maybe even help them with that. So today's our opportunity to hear what they're bringing to this critical problem, to understand it better and explore how we at the DTN can help them to be successful. But before we begin talking with Rupert and Liam, let's take a moment to turn to our own network. This monthly meeting is our monthly opportunity to build our own unity as a global community, to really meet each other, build our social cohesion, get inspired by what others are doing, and build the collective intelligence that we need to really shift our civilization's trajectory. So to help build our community coherence, we're going to start by going right now into breakout groups for just 5 minutes, just to meet each other, and be groups of 4 of us, and just to build a moment as kind of a short heart connection. And then we'll go to the panel discussion for about 30 minutes. And after that panel discussion, we'll rejoin the same breakout groups for another 10 minutes for a deepening conversation. So the people you meet now will be the people that you'll be able to explore more deeply with about 30 minutes from now. By the way, after that breakout group, we'll have a general Q&A time where you can just ask questions directly from Liam and Rupert. So let's go into the breakout groups now. Just remember, just 5 minutes, just time to share your name, where you're joining from, a single sentence maybe about where your heart mind is at right now. And please hold space for each other. Make sure everybody in your group gets a chance to be heard. Remember, you'll be in the same group later, so you can share more with each other later on. See you all back in 5 minutes. I was just saying that was fun, really enjoyable to spend that time together. And welcome, Rupert. And in a moment, here you go. Welcome, Liam. And really great to have you both here. And just by way of just a real brief introduction for everybody about you both. Rupert is an emeritus professor of philosophy at the University of East Anglia in Norwich, UK. And he was a former spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion, quite involved in really setting those first steps of XO, and they really made an impact in the UK a few years back. He's also authored several books, including one with the pretty unambiguous title, This Civilization is Finished, and another, Why Climate Breakdown Matters. And he's been on all kinds of big mainstream media like Newsnight, Question Time, Al Jazeera, and more. So welcome, Rupert. And Liam is a researcher, a community organizer, and cultural activist. I love that phrase. Really devoting his time to aid more effective responses to our climate crisis and the meta crisis. And Liam, I think you've worked on 3 continents over 20 years or so, applying social research, and you're a co-founder of a great group that maybe at some point you can talk a little bit about, called Life Itself, which I had the pleasure to connect with a couple of years ago, which is a group responding to the meta crisis. And Liam's also written a book on how Western ideology contributes to climate change in action, which maybe we can talk about and now in the next half hour or so. And as we begin, just want to remind to everyone, if you have questions, the second half of this session, it's a 75-minute session overall. You'll have the time to ask Rupert and Liam directly. But if you feel you'd rather not be spotlighted and all that kind of stuff that goes with being more public, feel free to write your question or comment in the chat, and we'll try to pick that up, and I'll try to incorporate that in that second half anyway. So just an invitation to do that. So let me maybe just turn to you, Rupert, and then we can hear from Liam also. But I'm really curious, basically, what led to the formation of the Climate Majority Project? There was something significant that happened from your time with Extinction Rebellion a few years ago to something which is right around climate, but taking a very different tack. So maybe you can help us on that kind of trajectory.
Yeah, I'll make a start by saying that if we're thinking about it from the XR connection, if you will, part of what I came to realize as my time in XR went on, and it was a wonderful time, and we achieved some fine things, especially in the UK. Part of what I came to realize, and a lot of other people were realizing it too, was that XR wasn't going to be able to fulfill the promise that it had made of being something which was going beyond party politics, going beyond ideology, of being something which could appeal to a really significant percentage of the population. That XR wasn't capable of being the vehicle which could transform our civilization. XR had done a superlative job at raising the alarm alongside the Fridays for Future, but it wasn't going to be the vehicle which led to the transformation that it was calling for. And so I started thinking and working with others about what that vehicle might look like. And one of the things I spotted was that there were quite a lot of people, some of them still in XR, many of them had moved on from XR, some of them had never been in XR, who were coming to similar conclusions and were working on the ground to do something about it, that a new moderate flank was emerging of climate action that included climate hubs, climate emergency centers, that included various developments in the business world, various developments in the cultural world, that included some of the organizations that we're incubating and have seed funded, such as Lawyers for Net Zero, Community Climate Action, very, very different organizations, one from another, but all pointing broadly in this same direction of a large encompassing mobilization or wave of action that was going to be able to involve far, far more people than XR ever could.
I see. And Liam, how did you get engaged with Rupert in helping I mean, what was your sort of trajectory to come to this place that you share with Rupert now?
Muted.
I got to know Rupert because we're both McGilchrist. We were both McGilchrist fans. Actually, I was organizing a conference in about 2019, or a small gathering, and I recognized Rupert because when I was looking at XR on television, there was this Rupert Reed. It's like, I know that name. I was actually such a devotee of McGilchrist that I read every review that had ever been published of the book. And the best one was by this guy, Rupert Reed. And then when I saw someone with the same name, was that in fact the same person? So we'd gotten in touch in that way. And I had started a meta crisis awareness network. Life Itself is essentially that. We didn't have the name at the time, but I left cognitive science in 2016 because I felt like we were in a civilizational wobble. I kind of decided to understand society as my life's work when I was in university, and I thought I was going to do that through academia. But then when I saw several factors, including the speeding up climate timeline and Donald Trump's candidacy, he wasn't elected yet. All I needed to know is that he was close to being elected. And I said, okay, look, this is basically this house of cards is wobbling. I'm going to get kind of more involved in doing stuff. And it was really out of working on meta-crisis awareness and thinking about the structure of what response to the meta-crisis would be for several years that I said, yeah, actually, I think a pragmatic response to the climate crisis that took the first few steps to kind of meta-modern politics is probably the most credible, useful response, best use of my time.
Wow, that's great. So you took these kind of two different paths and converged. And I guess one of the things just to kind of highlight is what is the big shift from that sort of XR type strategy to what you are trying to follow with Climate Majority Project? Because I'll say when XR first came on the scene, to me it was such a breath of fresh air. I was so inspired, so excited, and they have been quite successful, haven't they, in some certain respects, in helping to kind of shift the needle of awareness. But where do you see their success, and where do you see the need to sort of move on from what they've done to something very different?
Well, obviously that's a big question, but I could start by saying two fairly straightforward things. One is that it's simply a fact that while XR was enormously successful in raising the alarm, forcing in this country a national conversation, to some extent a global conversation around the climate crisis, changing climate consciousness seemingly permanently, it wasn't successful in realizing its aims. And we are now in 2024. The goal, the second demand of Extinction Rebellion back when we launched in 2018 was to go carbon net zero by 2025. It's 2024, right? I mean, I don't need to say any more.
Not quite there.
The other point I would make is, and this is, I think, some of what we'll be talking about this evening, that XR sought, as I say, to go beyond the ghetto in which the climate movement and green activism had become stuck. And in certain particular respects, it succeeded. It was brilliant, for example, the way in XR we didn't go around just being angry all the time and naming and shaming people. So we made certain kind of breaks with tradition. But XR just didn't succeed in mainstreaming culturally. And that is the very challenging objective that we have set ourselves.
Right. And so what are the strategies that you have highlighted as the way to try to make that bigger, much bigger impact?
Liam?
Yeah, well, I mean, the most important thing is, as you marked out at the beginning, so climate concern is pretty widespread, especially in the UK. XR has done its job. So part of the thing is that, okay, radical activism may have drawn a lot of eyeballs. People are concerned, but people don't know that they're concerned. I think one thing that we're really want to emphasize, it's because radical or really serious climate action is kind of this province of progressive activist. That's a subculture. Essentially, there's a subculture that sort of owns the idea of very radical climate action. Most of the people who are very concerned don't identify with that subculture. People don't express that sentiment. So it's because the face of urgency is largely a progressive face that people don't identify with truly urgent climate action. So one of the first things we really did was just organize a media campaign that sort of punctures pluralistic ignorance. Now it's become this term of art. There was a Science article a short while ago that talked about the fact that about 70% of people would give 1% of their income, but people think that number is 43%. Right. And so we noticed these numbers already. And the idea was like, yeah, actually, you're part of a climate majority. Already, a lot of people are concerned. There's also, we could talk about later, sort of a collapsitarian majority. It's only a near majority, but it's like basically some percentage of people are at least worried about the possibility of civilizational collapse, which isn't to say they believe it will happen. They think it's a serious concern, right? Which is, basically change happens in two stages: when people know change has to happen, and when people know that everybody else knows that change needs to happen.
Mhm.
And even something like collapse, right? If you know that everybody else knows this, it's actually a reason for hope. So that's part of the, what we're working on, right? And then there's a couple of other campaigns we could talk about, which are sort of targeting larger population. So it's really about, well, how do you make opportunities for large numbers of people to act in a way that really models urgency, right? So they get.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And you're moving towards an area that to me I find one of the most challenging that I think you're going to have to work with, and I really, really love to explore with you how we work through that. So it's kind of to do with the fact that obviously, we live in a world right now where I mean the dominant culture uh tells us that the world works according to a certain way. We need economic growth and like all the things people rely on. And when we look at the sort of the real truth about the climate, we kind of get, as I don't need to explain to either of you two, of course, we get to these deeper systemic shifts that are required to happen in our global economy and our overall culture. But then, how do you communicate that to people who have been basically conditioned by our mainstream society to push that away? Oh, now you're sounding so bloody like woke or so progressive. I'm not one of you radicals. I'm worried about climate, but don't tell me I've got to change how I eat what my diet is like, and all those things that instantly get people to sort of inoculated against these ideas to push back. So this to me is the crux of how can the majority get excited about making these changes? Do you have to water down the message? Do you have to avoid going to some of the troubling things, or how do you work through that?
Mm-mm.
You go first, Liam.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing, of course, is there's a process commitment, right? So part of what really, I think the whole CMP starts around the four strands, which is you have to know the truth, you have to have a place, like some support in which to handle the truth, right? Support from other people, something that you can do, and then kind of both sense making and a sense of shared endeavor, right? So, and I think the thing that what we're worried about in many ways is process. I think what separates us from a lot of other movements is that, look, XR, one of the great bets of XR was the Citizens Assembly. They did not tell people, here's the platform. They created the conditions in which a platform could be created, right? And so part of what we're doing as well is, well, let's create a community of concern. People can start acting together on things which are important, and they can organize around that. And if you have people organizing with and knowing each other, then they can work things out slowly but surely, right? Because what we really need to do is just get started moving.
Mm-hmm.
And if people form into communities and start moving and form a sense of community, I mean, guess what? People don't actually internalize difficult ideas because they reason them through. They basically form trust networks, and difficult ideas move within trust networks. And you're going to have stronger trust networks just by organizing around things that obviously need doing and creating good, democratic, open conversations that people really believe respect them, that are it's actual real democracy. And then you'll get ideas traveling.
Love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I just pick up from that? This crucial point about at a certain point, you just have to get started acting. And for some people, that point comes sooner than for others. But basically, we're very interested in seeking to take people on a journey and to be serious about going on that journey with them. That is explained in some detail in our book. You don't instantly get to the end of the journey. One way of putting the problem that we see in quite a lot of conventional activism and quite a lot of the radical flank as it's manifested in the past several years is that it's tended to kind of sound as if people ought to be able to move straight away to the end of the journey. But no, you have to actually meet people where they are. You have to start where they are, and then you can then you can travel somewhere. And yeah, that's what we seek to do in various ways.
Yeah, I really like that, and it reminds me of that notion of citizen action networks that Indra Adnan and Pat Kane from Alternative World, who we've had also here on the DTN before, talk about. So it's really like what I'm hearing you saying is you got to start off setting the conditions for people to actually look at these issues together in a place of trust locally, and we can sort of it seems like we can have some faith that when they start looking at these things together, then they can begin to go on this journey, like you're saying, Rupert, to some of the bigger changes.
Absolutely.
And one of the conditions, I think you say one of the core elements of the whole program is tell the real truth about the climate emergency. And but then again, how much that in itself can be an issue, right? So even when people talk about net zero, and then we talk about some of these kind of techno solutions like new engineering. Oh yeah, we can get to net zero by doing these massive carbon sucking machines, like some sort of science fiction. Like, do you go into this detail and really let people know this is not the case, and it's not just investing in renewables. Look at all the other like look at all the impacts of that. So again, to what degree does the telling the real truth about climate emergency lead to maybe emotional despair or people then having to realize the systemic issues that then they reject because they don't want to go there. So I'm just kind of curious how you get that message out in a way that it really gets the sense of the depth of and the urgency, but without the emotional or the cognitive disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. This is such a crucial question, right? I think that anyone who has ever seen me give a public talk or appear in the media will be well aware that I don't pull my punches on it. And I think that goes for all of us in the Climate Majority Project. And that is because we believe that people are capable of handling the truth. And we've got various reasons for believing that. One is provided by our collaborator, People Get Real, who did some very interesting polling recently. You can see it if you go to peoplegetreal.org. The polling showed, for example, that a significantly higher percentage of the British population want to be told the truth about climate, no matter whether there's cause for optimism or not, than insist that they are given optimism to accompany bad news about the climate. So I'll just say that again so people can process it. So a significantly larger number of people are comfortable with being told the truth, even if it's just bad, when you ask them, than say, no, I insist that you give me some kind of positive spin when you tell me bad news about the climate. Now, that's really, really encouraging. We think that one can go much further than this, that if you handle it right, if you, as Liam said a minute ago, if you provide the kind of support structure for people to be able to deal with this bad news, which could be all sorts of things. It could be as simple as a peer group. It could be a little group on the Deep Transformation Network. People get together to compare their hopes and fears around the situation. If you provide people with some kind of support for handling the bad news, we think that actually the bad news can be energizing. So, for example, there's been a lot of talk recently about, oh, is 1.5 degrees gone or not? Are we out of the safe zone on climate? And people saying, oh, but if people think that 1.5 is gone, they'll despair. But we think the opposite is potentially true. That once people realize that they were promised by governments that we would stay below 1.5 degrees, that they've been let down, that they've been betrayed, that the situation is a lot worse than a lot of people have represented it as, then sure, there'll be a lot of disturbed feelings. But that anger and that grief and that fear, if you handle it skillfully, that can become a powerful energy and a real kind of passionate driver of the action that we so badly need. Liam, I wonder if you want to take that up and mention our distress campaign as well.
Yeah, well, there's two things, and I think just to follow on from what you're saying there, Rupert, is the fact that that's only going to keep on growing, right? So the weather's not getting any better. So what has really been driving climate concern and climate action? Well, the weather's getting worse. It's going to keep on getting worse. And so basically we see ourselves as catalyzing a historically inevitable movement, right? So part of what one has to realize is like, yeah, there's a whole wave of people coming. What one wants to do is spread that narrative that it is coming. And the tipping point is inevitable. The more people know that the tipping point is inevitable, the faster it happens, right? And what's actually going to drive it is partially people dealing with climate distress. So, part of what we do is just, in terms of actual campaign emphases, is things like getting distress into education. So right now we have a campaign partner, Teach the Future, which has gotten a new education requirement onto the incoming Labour Party's platform. So for US viewers, that's essentially like the Democratic Party. It's now on the manifesto of what the UK's version of the Democratic Party. That's almost certainly going to win the next election, to have greater climate education. And there's a question of whether that's going to have distress, like training for distress, handling distress with it, right? This is a massive opportunity to get spaces for holding emotions around climate onto the public agenda. So these two strands that are neglected, which is awareness of this inevitable movement, the sense of collective endeavor, and the inner work, are neglected. We have this old information deficit theory, facts, action, right? The emotion in the middle and the feeling of being part of something larger are missing. So our real emphasis in many ways is those two missing elements, which are the most.
It makes so much sense to me. In fact, as somebody who also grew up in the UK, I grew up in the 60s and 70s with this kind of myth of the Winston Churchill effect, right? When England went to war with the Nazis and Germany, and Winston Churchill finally became prime minister. And we know now, and I didn't know at the time, because he was a racist, imperialist, horrendous ideologue in many ways. But he stirred the entire country around with that speech when he said, "I have nothing to offer you but blood, sweat, and tears." And that's what everyone wanted to hear, because they knew that already. But by having a leader actually state it.
People feel it, people feel it in their bones. So many people, more than ever say it yet, we've got this pluralistic ignorance situation, feel that we're in real trouble. So, we're calling out the no-clothedness of the emperor, and we think there's a lot of energy to be tapped there. Just one thing I would correct you on, though, Jeremy, I don't think it was a myth. So yeah, Churchill was a nasty man in a number of ways, but he was also truly, as you say, a great war leader. He did rally people. And let's put it bluntly, we in the world today are awaiting our climate Churchill, but we're not just going to sit around waiting in the Climate Majority Project, right? We're actually trying to engineer the conditions for the emergence of that person or persons.
Exactly. No, I think that's fantastic. And just a couple more questions, and then I want to pause, and so we can go into breakout rooms so people can talk together, and then we can all join the conversation later on. But one has to do with the impact of business. And I know that you have a strategy to really try to reach out to business. And again, I have to be honest, to me, one of the biggest dangers that I see is the sort of greenwashing type issues, where as you get closer to to corporations, and they'll say great things, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, we want to help, we want to incorporate you in," and then because they're driven by shareholder maximization, ultimately, do they really want to make the changes that are needed? And do you get sort of have to sucked in and then have to get yourself undermined? Or is there a way, how are you engaging with business in a way where you can really engage with one of the most important, powerful agents for potential change, but without all those dangers?
Yeah, well, so there's no way to avoid those dangers completely. I mean, basically, so what we're talking about here is there's a campaign called Regulate Us Better. Right. And so, but it's in the name that there's something called market fundamentalism, right? So businesses, if you're a business person, you're supposed to believe with hard work and innovation, we can get to net zero, right? We don't need no nasty government laws. It's just, we're going to invent it. Elon Musk is basically kind of allows, essentially market fundamentalism to keep on believing in itself, because, okay, well, it's just Tesla is going to come along. There's going to be more Teslas. And suddenly it's just going to be products invented by genius guys are going to get us to net zero, right? So one basically needs business people to help puncture that. There's nobody else, nobody can puncture that ideological delusion better than technologists themselves, who are the ones that are being looked to for market fundamentalism to continue. If they say, yeah, look, we are not getting there. We are absolutely not getting there without government intervention. Regardless of whether they then want to make money out of it, they probably will. They've done damage to a counterproductive ideological structure, right? It's as simple as that. What you need to do is undermine blind spots, like societal level blind spots caused by societal level ideologies, right? And so this idea that just the market can solve everything, which almost nobody really believes in. I mean, the Financial Times editorial board, Martin Wolf wouldn't say this, even The Economist wouldn't say this, but it's still basically taboo to talk about how you need government intervention to get to net zero as a business. So you just need to basically undermine that method, that ideology. And right now, there's not a lot of business-led climate efforts that are doing that. We think it's possible. It's again a silent majority thing. 80% of people, 80% of business leaders realize that we are not getting to net zero without legislation. You just need to get more of them to come out of the closet. And I use that analogy advisedly, right? It's a lot like that.
That's great. Thanks, Liam. Makes so much sense to me. And I have so many other questions I'd like to ask myself. I don't want to hog the space. I'm looking at the time. So I'm going to pause right now. And now will be our opportunity for people to go into breakout rooms where you can discuss some of these issues together. And I'm going to ask you, in the breakout room, we'll have 10 minutes in the breakout rooms, the same people you were with before, unless you've joined since then, you'll be on a new room, to ask what has been your experience in raising climate issues with those in your community. And love to hear how you've sensed that sense of how open people are to that. And then how can you help the climate movement to become more mainstream? Because one of the things I hope we'll talk about in the second half is just some of the strategies to go from the UK to other parts of the world and what can be around that. So those are two questions that we can explore in the breakout rooms together. I might sort of hover in and out different rooms. If you see me pop into a room, you can just ignore me, think like I'm a fly on the wall. I'll just be there for a minute or two and go to another one, just so I can get a feel. And see you all again in 10 minutes, where you'll be able to share your own questions and reflections with Rupert and Liam. Great. So now let's get the three of us spotlighted again. And that was so much rich conversation that I had the opportunity to just kind of hover in and out of. I can feel there's a lot of aliveness around these topics. So now I invite anybody who wants to share their questions directly with Rupert or Liam, or have a perspective they want to add, to raise your hand and just join the conversation. And maybe just to start, just to kick off with, as people are raising their hands, I can see. In fact, I was going to just ask a question that Barbara had put in the chat, but now that I see that Barbara has raised her hand, I'll just skip that. Why don't we go directly to the first hand raise, to Matt in Sacred Valley. Hi there, Matt.
Yes, hello. Rupert, I did I understand that you said you were talking about 1.5, and my understanding is that we've already gone past that. So I was wondering why you were bringing that up as a particularly relevant point.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much.
That's a fair question. But look, the reason I was bringing it up is because there are still an astonishing number of people who don't accept the observation that we've gone past it. Because, of course, measuring what exactly it is to go past 1.5 is a complex matter and a debatable matter. But the main reason why they don't want to accept it is because it challenges their worldview too much. It makes it difficult for them to go on pretending that we're going to be able to manage some kind of magical, smooth, so-called green transition to net zero and everything's going to be fine, which is still what far too many people in government and some in business and some even in science want to hope or to believe. The technicality they fall back on is that you can't say for certain that the average global level of overheat is above 1.5 until it has been above 1.5 for a certain amount of time. It's been above 1.5 for most of the last year, and it is beyond absurd for people to carry on pretending that we're going to be able to stay in the safe zone and get down back below that 1.5 figure. But some people are still doing it, so that's why I mentioned it.
Okay, many thanks, Rupert. I appreciate your viewpoint.
And let's turn to Barbara.
Thank you, Jeremy. Simply, the net zero exercise ignores the ecological cost of getting to net zero. And I think we have to bear that in mind. So we cannot look at climate collapse without looking also at ecosystems collapse and also at financial collapse, because they're all happening in tandem and happening very rapidly. So therefore, I'm saying we need to have a contingency arrangement in the event that the banks stop opening. I think we should be moving to rationing.
Yeah. And, you know, to take Barbara's point and just kind of expand it out into a question for you both. That was actually a question I really wanted to get to in that first half too. So thanks for raising that. How do we link the climate crisis into the overall ecological collapse that we are looking at? Because really, sometimes you can think climate itself is really just like, if anything, a little bit like a patient who's showing high temperature because there's an underlying disease. But again, how can you do that and still stay true to your climate majority strategy?
Yeah, Liam.
Well, I mean, basically, the first thing is that most people who care enough to get involved in CMP already take climate as basically a shorthand for some type of wider environmental collapse or difficulties. So the reason that we use climate in many ways is when you start insisting on talking about ecological boundaries and all sorts of other things that people don't understand straight away, you end up speaking to the bubble pretty quickly. So you might as well use the words that people know about, the keywords that most people know about. And if they start listening a little bit and realize that, yeah, the rest of the environment is also in incredible trouble. People at least know biodiversity, right? And so biodiversity is really in many ways, as much as you need to start saying, look, you're not going to get there just by reducing carbon emissions. You can make technology and you're not going to animals.
This is the question, is that we're actually accelerating the problem. The green transition is accelerating the ecological collapse.
Yeah, when it's done wrong. And some of what's happening is of that nature, some is not.
All of what's happening is accelerating.
No, I'm sorry, that's an exaggeration, Barbara. I can't accept that. If you have so for example, one part of the green transition is retrofitting homes and proper house insulation. That's not accelerating ecological collapse.
But yeah, thanks for that question and for that response, Rupert. It's a big question. I'm glad you brought it into the topic today, but we've got so much I want to cover. I just don't want to go deep into that, but I really appreciate the importance of that question. It really is huge. And I'm glad you, Rupert, and Liam are looking at that. And so to Manu, you want to share? Hey there, Manu, good to see you.
Hi. Thank you. I'm taking it back to the main question of finding a climate majority. And I'm having difficulties about this concept of a majority, because in my view, people are tribal. They either support this soccer team or that soccer team, or they either support this country and that country, and this is a global effort. So it's kind of a difficult concept to have a majority around something when people are different in their identities, when people are different in the kind of actions that they want. And I'm not saying I'm criticizing, I just like, are we looking for a silver bullet, or do you have thoughts on how we can have different kinds of efforts that add up to a certain majority? I'm interested
Yes.
in your thoughts about this.
Yeah, that's it. It's the latter, right? So we're not looking for a silver bullet. One of our little slogans that we like to use is the next big thing is lots of smaller things, all added up
Right.
to add up to a really, really huge thing. Liam, you want to take this up?
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, it's just worth pointing out that's always been true, right? And there's been electoral majorities that have achieved all sorts of incredible changes, right? They're usually diverse, people that want to agree on something quite different. So when it happens, we're seeing change across the spectrum on this, right? I mean, young Republicans in the US are climate concerned. That's important. I mean, we want some hope. Look at that. Look at the numbers of, under 25 conservatives. They think about climate.
Yeah, I was just going to pitch in a man who is like in the States, in the Republican side, it's almost 3/4 are concerned about climate change. Like it is not a partisan issue. You think it's a partisan issue, but actually no, it's maybe 80% of Democrats, but it's a majority of Republicans. So there is a broad concerned population in the States, at least, that is
That's great.
very concerned.
And thanks for that. And that is great to get that perspective. Certainly for me and others who are in the United States, it's easy to really fall into despair when you look at what's actually the political dialogue is about. And one thing I'd like to touch on, but I want to get back to the other questions in line, but maybe at some point, Rupert and Liam, you can talk about the ideas about expanding beyond the UK onto sort of more the global arena. But let me turn to Daniel. You there, Daniel? And let's get you off mute, Daniel.
I got it. Okay. I have many questions, so I pick one. Who is talking about the future? I want to hear somebody talking about where we're going, rather than just pointing to where the problems are. And because the thing that concerns me the most is that so much of this seems to be automatic. It has its own systemic built-in drivers that just delivers to a certain future. And we try to say, hey, this is happening, but I don't hear enough. What's new humanity going to look like? I mean, we know we need to be global, but that's a utopian, bold conversation. Say, hey, so how is a cooperative humanity gonna be with each other? How do we connect with each other? And I feel that's like when you said a lot of little changes add to a big change. To me, the big changes that need to happen are in families and in the relationship field amongst people that is so traumatized that we cannot bring up climate because the conversation goes sideways so quickly because emotions are out of hand. And it seems to accelerate at really alarming speed. So I don't know if that's clear what I'm asking, but
Yeah, that's a lovely, really important set of questions. One small point I would make is that what you talked about there, Daniel, is exactly what Jeremy and I talked about when we had our dialogue at Bristol, right, Jeremy? Which is, where are we trying to end up with this, right? What is the big picture? What is the goal? Jeremy likes this term ecological civilization, which I also like a lot, although I do worry that it's been slightly appropriated by the Chinese government. And I like to use this term throughutopia, which is not so much about arriving anywhere, but about the process that we have to go through and that we will keep going through, the process of transformation for a long time to come, but to have some kind of sense of how that can happen in as best a way as possible, and how we can flourish through these difficulties, how, like we were saying earlier, we can get incredible energy from the very difficult emotions which we're going to be experiencing if we provide the right kind of containers for them, which is something, for example, that I've learned from my teacher, Joanna Macy, and that is a hugely positive possibility that can happen, that it is happening.
Right.
So those would be a few kind of starting points from me. I think that the Threetopia idea is potentially quite helpful here, because it provides a sense of direction without giving one this kind of false sense that we're going to end up either in this kind of wonderful utopia where everything's going to be great, or that we're going to end up in complete apocalypse. The truth probably lies somewhere between the two, even though the truth is that right now we're heading for something which looks quite like complete apocalypse.
Yeah. So yeah, I love how you look at that dynamic, Rupert. And it's so important to realize so much we're embedded in this neoliberal global economy. And we had Margaret Thatcher saying decades ago, there is no alternative, that famous phrase.
Right.
And it's so important that we do have a sense there is an alternative. We need a light and not get fixated on some future and then argue about the details. So Liam, you have more, and then let's go to Phila.
This is why we want to integrate the bad news and the good, right? Because if you really think about, okay, if you look at mentions like Google Trends on the Great Turning, you basically see, a little bump in 2003 and then nothing, really flat. And then COVID starts, and then immediately a small uptick, and then an explosion to 4 times what had ever happened, right? What happened was there was an assault on normal. Normal suddenly didn't feel as real, right? And so when people start seeing these systemic disruptions, you also want to be ready for, they're going to see normal get shattered again and challenged again. And when you have the stories ready to go and plans ready to go and some examples of what the future could like ready to go, then suddenly you'll get a huge uptick, right? So it's be ready for the windows of opportunity in the future, which are coming.
Love that. Yeah. Thank you, Liam. Great question, Daniel. Thanks you. And let's turn to Phila.
I have a quick question. For 8 months, I've been trying to implement your model with a population that is unconcerned. So come Earth Day, April 20th, I'm going to have a table at a festival. I've got my literature, my sign-up sheet, and so forth. But the question I have for you is, as people walk by, these unconcerned people, what should I say to them to get their attention and possibly start a conversation? Just a quickie little wrap, couple sentences.
Rupert, you're muted, I think.
Sorry, I muted myself. One initial thing I would say is don't assume that they are unconcerned, right? I mean, you don't know that they're unconcerned. As in along the lines of what we were saying earlier, my bet is that quite a lot of them are concerned, and quite a lot of them have probably never spoken about the fact that they are concerned. So that's one possible way in, would be to say something like, do you have concerns that you haven't shared with others, that we may be heading for a difficult future unless we do something about it? Now, I don't know, that's not exactly, I haven't honed that line to be like an ad man's catchy phrase, but maybe you can do a bit of work with that sentiment, and maybe that's the way to get people. It does also depend what kind of festival it is. My experience is that at some festivals, people are not interested in this conversation, but that in others, they really are.
Well, the audience will be varied.
Right. But love that response is like asking people to share if they have that concern, and then maybe start from there. Seems like a lovely idea. Thanks, Phila.
Thank you.
To Wanda.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to echo some comments that have come up. I'm in a lot of groups that have to do with sustainability and permaculture and eco perspectives that relate to spirituality also. And we've had a lot of discussions around the impact of personal trauma and collective trauma. Like, we're in a world where there has been war for so long, where there's been violence for so long, that in many cases, people's humanity has been wounded and crushed. And I think it's really important that we focus quite a bit on healing personal trauma and collective trauma, and even the possibility that in some cases, the inability to take action, the unwillingness to take action, the greediness of certain sectors of our world is almost like suiciding. So if you have anything to add about that, Rupert and Liam, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Liam, do you want to take that one? It seems to me that one thing that is relevant there is our climate distress campaign.
Yeah. Well, I mean, essentially, I think there's it's a society-wide concern. How do we go deeper in distress? And I think, you know, part of it is what we've been talking about during this call, right? That people are able to handle distress when they have other people and they feel like they're really part of something larger, and they actually have something to do. So actually all of those things together, I think the holistic response is the most important thing for us. I mean, really, for a lot of people, it depends. I mean, some of the people, you know, who never feel climate distress are ones who immediately found something to do with their energy as soon as they woke up to the climate crisis. They just had this really obvious way of channeling their energy. Other people really had to spend a lot of time with it and sort of wrap their head around this really difficult crisis. And I think, you know, it's also what I would say as well is that partially is that I'm careful of right answers. I think that it's a lot like psychologists. There's a huge number of different modalities and communities, and you actually find the one that's right for you. So, I mean, that's really my thing. It's just like psychology generally. There's not a right way of doing therapy, and there's not a right way of holding climate grief either. So we have a resource website with all the different groups that are doing things, different therapy methods, different procedures, and I would look at which is most useful for you.
Wow, thanks to you both for those answers. And one thing I would add, and I'll just put this in the chat right now, just in terms of our community right now, looking at these issues, actually on Thursday, 2 days from now, we have a circle of practice group, which is designed for a deeper dialogue and a time to really explore further what we've been talking about today, to really practice that deep listening, integrating, anchoring, facilitated by 3DTN of our host, Miriam, Galia, and Sigurd. So if you click on that link and RSVP, you'll have an opportunity to really kind of explore at a deeper place some of the very important questions you just raised there, Wanda. So thanks for that. I can see we're not going to get to everyone's questions, unfortunately, in time. I did want to I had a backlog of questions people put in the chat. There was one I wanted to raise with you both, and then we can move to Hamish, maybe Erica, Tina, and Paddy, and just maybe I'll invite you to just all be spotlighted together, share your questions as one final group, and then Rupert and Liam can go. But the question from the chat was from Veronica May. She wrote, "We're told that it only takes 25% of the population to tip the balance. Have we reached that yet?" I'm curious about your kind of theory of change around that. What percent are you looking for, and what level of commitment you need from that to whatever percent it is to really make that tip?
Good. So we don't have a firm answer to this. So we don't have to have a firm answer to it yet because we're some way off it, right? I think it's clear that there are not 25% of people taking active measures in relation to the climate and ecological emergency. We think that the number 25% may have something to it. There is some sociological, historical evidence for it. It's there in the recent work of Erica Chenoweth. It's there in the excellent work of Damon Centola. It's there in the work of a host of other people who Liam could tell you about. This is partly his field. And I have my own little pet theory as to why the 25% figure may be psychologically significant as it seems for human beings. Because if you're getting a growing movement and you reach 25% and people know that, then maybe they can figure out, oh, well, they're halfway to having the majority. They've got the majority of the way to actually winning. and maybe that has psychological significance. So we think that this is ambitious. It's clearly something which no one's achieved yet. And what we're talking about in the Climate Majority Project is trying to help to unleash and name and network and support a vast phenomenon, which is going to be all across this country, the UK, all across the world. Eventually, obviously, it's no good if we get the CMP winning, as it were, in the UK, but not anywhere else, because we're talking about a truly global phenomenon. So ultimately, we have to be thinking about active international liaisons and so on and so forth. And ultimately, of course, the climate majority has to be a majority in the global south, which is the majority world. But yes, this figure of 25%, it may be of some significance. It is roughly what we're aiming towards. It is incredibly ambitious, but it's in a way pointless to aim at anything less.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. So now, just as we're moving towards closing, just trying to keep an eye on the time. My thought is, let me ask if Hamish, Erica, Tina, and Paddy could be spotlighted, and I'll ask each of you to just take really no more than one sentence or so, just to share your question or reflection, and then Rupert and Liam can just kind of summarize what they hear. If you have not yet had the chance to ask the question, my suggestion is please write it in the chat. I'm going to upload the video, and any questions that are added right now that didn't get asked in person, I'll put there in the write-up, and then ask Rupert and Liam if you have a chance, to take a scan of that at some point, and maybe we can keep this dialogue going. So just over to the four of you, just for really just to get your words, your voice into this conversation before we close. And please keep it brief.
So shall I start then?
Sure.
Well, my question was linked to that last discussion, actually, because it was really about how do we get enough people committed to making that change to drive the societal and government changes we need at the speed necessary. Because at the moment, we're a little bit niche. We're all, we tend to talk to people like us, and there aren't nearly enough people who are serious enough to do something about it, and not just personally, but societally. So, and they're, and partly it's neoliberal economics. They're convinced by the media that works and all that stuff, which is a myth.
Thanks, Hamish. And let's turn to Erica.
Thank you. My question was really about the future that we are working towards. You began to refer to it, you talked about Utopia. But some people believe that we are already past the tipping point and that we are facing collapse. And I'm curious as to what's the future that you are asking people to work towards? Is it trying to save and achieve net zero and think that's the answer? Or is it more about adapting to the inevitable?
Thank you for bringing that in, Erica. And Tina, and then we'll go to Paddy.
Liam said earlier something that always struck me, which is people need a thing to do. They need a clear thing to do, and it really makes a difference, because once they do that one thing, then they're in the door. And once you're in the door of activism, I'm sure we all discovered you just can't leave because you find the mess that's behind it. So I was asking Rupert and Liam and you, Jeremy, if there was the one thing you could fight. You could target just one goal for now, one simple achievable goal, like we clean the waterways or whatever, or this single river. What would that one be? Because it would be much easier to get people to unite around one thing. And then once we've done that, we're choreographed to do the next and the next and the next. But one with a successful outcome would be good.
Ooh. And then Paddy, and then over to you, Rupert and Liam. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for this talk. It's great. My question is, so I've noticed that so on the one hand, you're aiming for the climate majority. On the other hand, some of your projects, or I get the impression anyway, that some of your projects are going towards like basically trying to get politicians to do more as well. So for example, the Regulate Us one from businesses, that's essentially asking the governments to do more to regulate in that. And as opposed to, or as well as, I'm not sure exactly what the balance is, getting people to do things within their communities and within the businesses they actually work in and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I was kind of wondering what your views on the kind of balance between those two and what's got more opportunity to improve things and what to focus on and all that kind of, just about that kind of balance, basically.
Well, so Rupert and Liam, I've kind of made it a little challenging for you. 4 incredible questions. We could spend the next half hour on those. But if you could maybe just kind of summarize what you heard and what you want to leave people with, as we're kind of at the end of our time, and just where you'd like people to go from this conversation.
Yeah, I'll try say something to Paddy and Erica. Liam can answer Tina's question of what the one thing is. So Paddy, yeah, look, it's both and as we see it. For example, a lot of our emphasis is increasingly falling in the domain of strategic and transformative adaptation, because to come to Erica's question, we are in very, very serious trouble. We've got our levels of adaptation preparedness in the UK are absolutely pitiful. My guess is that they're no better in most of the United States. That has to change, and that effort to change will have to be led to a considerable extent by citizens in default of sufficient government action. But we all also know that if we are going to get anywhere near to where we need to be, there are some things which only states can make possible. So the point of our Regulate Us campaign is that businesses, while there's things they can do, they can't do the things that need to be done by themselves, even if they are well-intentioned. But they could use their incredible lobbying power to force government, to force them to do some of those things. And that would be an absolute game changer. Liam, is that the one thing, or is it something else? You tell us. You're muted.
Probably good to say that's precisely, what kind of ecological movements do, and part of what we do is kind of not try to, simple as possible and those simpler. And so, the thing is to find your own work to do, because really what we're looking at is a climate mobilization, and this is part of the problem. The government isn't doing its job, right? In a real wartime mobilization, the government was giving everybody different jobs. Right now, what we need is a distributed movement where people are finding the way to fit in. So adaptation might be a great answer for what, one thing everybody could be doing, because it models urgency. So I think in terms of getting lots of people on side, what you want to do is something that models urgency, that gives other people a chance to see someone like them doing something incredibly urgent, that says, okay, this really matters to this person. For a lot of people, that's adaptation. Other people, it might be Regulate Us. Other people, it might be lobbying for climate distress. But the question is, whatever it is, it has to look like urgency to yourself and everybody around you.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I just can't even thank you enough, Rupert and Liam, for bringing all this energy and these ideas and inspiration to our community today. And I just feel, I sense the excitement and the interest level is just kind of huge from not just the UK, but people around the world to look at exactly what you're trying to do. So if you were unable to, if you had your hand up, didn't get a chance to ask the question directly, please write it in the chat. I'll put it up when I put up the recording. And so we can hopefully continue this dialogue and this conversation. As a reminder, then on Thursday, 2 days from now, you can go deeper on these topics in our circle of practice. I gave you that link. And also just in terms of another opportunity for DTN members to connect together to explore these topics, 2 Thursdays from this Thursday, on April the 18th, is another in the meetings of the Village DTN, which with this, it's a great community, been started recently by Jason Sears, facilitated collaboratively with other DTN volunteers. Village DTN is this intimate space where people can just have conversations about the topics without judgment and with a sense of belonging. And some of the things people have already talked about, there have been things like how to talk about climate change in the way that doesn't freak people out to make them shut down. So exactly the types of things we can explore more. So I'm going to just put that link in the chat too. And really a big thank you to you both. And we'd love to explore more on the DTN, how we can actually help. Certainly when you're looking to expand and move forward, you've got a significant community here from around the world who really want to see you successful and be part of that success with you. So it's been great having
Thanks,
you.
Jeremy. That means a lot to us. We really appreciate it. And yeah, it's been a super high quality event here this evening. It's a testimony to the quality of the network.
Yeah. Thanks so much, and look forward to more. Take care now.
Great. Yes, us too.
Yeah.
Thanks and goodbye.
Right.